1943, Philadelphia Naval Shipyard. The year was 1943, and the world was locked in the most devastating war humanity had ever known. In the Atlantic, German U-boats prowled like wolves, tearing through convoys, dragging soldiers, civilians, and supplies to the cold seabed. In the Pacific, Japan's navy fought with desperate ferocity. Victory for the Allies depended on mastery of the seas. But in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, far from the front lines, rumors began to stir of something extraordinary, an experiment whispered only in shadows. The United States Navy, some claimed, was attempting the impossible, to make a warship disappear. Not by camouflage, not by deception, but by bending the very laws of physics themselves. The chosen vessel was the USS Eldridge D-173, a newly commissioned destroyer escort. Officially, her duty would be escorting convoys across the Atlantic, guarding them against submarines. Unofficially, she was said to be the centerpiece of an experiment known only by the cryptic name, Project Rainbow. The promise of invisibility. It began with the work of Nikola Tesla and Albert Einstein, or so the legends say. Decades earlier, Tesla had spoken of manipulating electromagnetic fields on a scale so immense it could render objects unseen, or even transport them across space. Einstein, meanwhile, had published his theories of relativity, exploring the fabric of time and space as though it were pliable, something that could be bent and reshaped. By 1943, desperate for any edge in the war, the Navy allegedly took these ideas out of the realm of theory and into the realm of experiment. Scientists and naval officers gathered at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard, cloaked in secrecy, surrounded by armed guards. A massive array of Tesla coils, magnetic generators, and cables thicker than a man's arm were mounted aboard the USS Eldridge. The objective was audacious: to surround the ship with an electromagnetic field so powerful it would bend light around it, effectively cloaking it from sight, not only to the human eye, but also to enemy radar. To the outside world, the ship would vanish. But as with all stories born in shadows, what was intended to be an act of innovation soon crossed into the terrifying. Witnesses of the impossible. According to sailors who claimed to have been present, the first test was conducted in the summer of 1943. From a distance, dockworkers and crew aboard neighboring ships were ordered to watch. The engines of the Eldridge roared, the generators whining with an otherworldly hum. A green haze began to shimmer around the ship, faint at first, like heat rising from asphalt on a summer's day. Then, the haze thickened into a glowing fog that swallowed the vessel whole. Lightning-like arcs of energy leapt from mast to deck, crawling across the hull. The air smelled of ozone and burning metal. And then, in an instant, the Eldridge was gone. Not simply cloaked, not hidden, gone. Dockworkers stared in disbelief at the empty water where a 1,240-ton destroyer had been only moments before. Some swore they could still see a faint outline shimmering in the haze, a ghost of the ship flickering between worlds. Others reported that the ship had not just vanished, but appeared to bend, as if the water itself was folding in on it. Minutes passed. Panic spread. Had the experiment destroyed the ship? Then, with a violent crack, the Eldridge reappeared. The haze dissipated, leaving her floating once again at the pier. The metal of her hull groaned as though under immense stress, and the smell of scorched steel hung heavy in the air. But the horror was not over. The human cost. When boarding parties went to inspect the Eldridge, what they found has haunted sailors' lore ever since. Some crewmen were vomiting violently, their bodies racked with nausea. Others stumbled about in confusion, unable to recognize their surroundings or remember who they were. Still others screamed incoherently, clutching at their skulls as if something were clawing at their minds. And then there were those who never returned whole. Witnesses claimed that certain sailors had been fused into the very steel of the ship. Their arms, legs, even torsos, protruded grotesquely from the bulkheads and decks, as though the experiment had half merged them with the Eldridge itself. Some were still alive, screaming in agony until mercy, or madness, silenced them. Others, it was said, simply vanished. They were there one moment and gone the next, never seen again. One chilling account even describes crewmen bursting into flames spontaneously, their bodies consumed by a fire no water could extinguish. And even among those who survived, something strange lingered. Men reported bouts of invisibility, slipping from sight without warning, only to return moments later terrified and disoriented. The Navy tried to contain the disaster. Survivors were allegedly sworn to secrecy under threat of imprisonment, or worse. Many were discharged, deemed unfit for service, their medical files marked with vague explanations of neurological disorders. Yet, the stories could not be silenced. Whispers spread like wildfire through naval yards, through bars, through the letters of sailors who had seen too much. A ship out of place. But the strangest element of the Philadelphia experiment was yet to come. Eyewitnesses outside of Philadelphia, hundreds of miles away in Norfolk, Virginia, claimed to have seen the USS Eldridge appear in their harbor. For a few brief minutes, the ship reportedly materialized in the waters of Norfolk, before vanishing again just as suddenly. Later, it reappeared in Philadelphia, as if it had been ripped from one location and dropped into another by forces beyond comprehension. Teleportation. The word was unthinkable in 1943, a concept confined to the pages of pulp science fiction magazines. And yet, there it was, the implication that the Navy's experiment had not only made the Eldridge invisible, but had hurled her through space itself. If true, it meant Project Rainbow had crossed into realms of physics humanity was never meant to touch. Silencing the story. Officially, of course, the Navy denied everything. The USS Eldridge, they insisted, had been on routine missions throughout 1943, escorting convoys and training in the Atlantic. They pointed to deck logs, patrol reports, and other records as proof. To the skeptical, these documents were little more than carefully crafted cover stories. But the witnesses remained. Dockworkers, sailors, and even civilians swore that what they had seen was no illusion. Their testimonies, scattered and conflicting though they were, painted a chilling picture. A ship made to vanish, men lost to madness, and a secret buried beneath layers of military denial. And then there was Carlos Allende. Years after the war, a man by that name, or Carl Allen, as he was also known, sent letters to naval researchers, describing the Philadelphia experiment in extraordinary detail. He claimed to have witnessed the Eldridge vanish with his own eyes, and he filled page after page with notes about the physics behind it, invoking Einstein's unified field theory. Skeptics dismissed him as a hoaxer, a man prone to exaggeration and fantasy. But others noted that his accounts aligned eerily well with rumors already circulating among sailors. The legend of the Philadelphia experiment grew, fed by conspiracy theorists, paranormal investigators, and those who had an appetite for secrets the government would never confess. The fear that lingers. By the 1950s, the Philadelphia experiment had already taken on the shape of myth. Books were written, lectures delivered, and radio programs broadcast tales of the vanishing ship. But beneath the sensationalism lay a deeper unease. If the government had truly tampered with forces capable of bending space and time, what other experiments might they have conducted in silence? What secrets might still be buried in the vaults of naval intelligence, waiting for the day they, too, would be dragged into the light? To this day, the fate of the Eldridge remains one of the most persistent mysteries of World War II. Some say it was nothing more than a misunderstanding, a myth born of drunken sailors and misinterpreted documents. Others believe the experiment was real, and that its legacy continues in classified programs hidden in the shadows of the Pentagon. Because once you touch the fabric of reality itself, you cannot simply let go. And if ships can vanish, if men can be torn from their very place in the universe, What else might be possible? The survivors who spoke. In the years that followed the supposed events of 1943, a handful of voices emerged, claiming to be survivors, or to have known them. Their stories varied in detail, but were united by a single thread of terror. Something unnatural had been unleashed aboard the USS Eldridge. One alleged witness recounted that men were plagued by what he called freezing. They would suddenly become paralyzed, unable to move or speak, as though their bodies had slipped between dimensions. In extreme cases, it was said they became intangible, phasing in and out of reality, needing to be physically restrained by shipmates before they drifted away entirely. There was another story, more disturbing still, that some of the crew would vanish completely, only to reappear hours, or even days later. They returned dazed, disoriented, and with no memory of where they had been. Some bore burns, as if scorched by cosmic radiation. Others showed no wounds, but had aged in ways subtle yet undeniable. Wrinkles, streaks of gray, a weary gaze in young eyes. Most never spoke openly. Fear of military retaliation kept their tongues still. But the whispers traveled, and every whisper deepened the mystery. The letter of Carlos Allende. The legend might have faded into obscurity were it not for a man named Carlos Miguel Allende, also known as Carl Allen. In 1955, he sent a series of letters to a researcher named Morris K. Jessup, who had written about unidentified flying objects and advanced propulsion systems. In his letters, Allende claimed he had witnessed the Philadelphia experiment firsthand. His descriptions were rich with strange technical jargon, rambling physics, and allusions to Einstein's elusive unified field theory, a theory Einstein himself had abandoned as incomplete. Allende insisted the Navy had succeeded not only in cloaking the Eldridge, but in teleporting her across space and time. The experiment, he wrote, had been a success far greater than intended, yet also a catastrophe for the men involved. Jessup, intrigued, corresponded with Allende, but grew wary of his erratic and unstable personality. Then something stranger happened. Jessup received a package from the Office of Naval Research. Inside was a copy of his own book, The Case for the UFO, but annotated in 3 different handwritings, apparently commenting on alien technology, the Philadelphia experiment, and secret government knowledge. The handwriting, investigators concluded, was almost certainly Allende's. Yet the fact that the Navy itself had taken interest in his letters fueled speculation. If Allende was merely a hoaxer, why would the Office of Naval Research bother to keep his ramblings? The questions only multiplied. The Cold War connection. By the 1950s, America had entered the Cold War, a battle of ideologies and technologies fought in the shadows. The Soviet Union raced to develop nuclear weapons, long-range missiles, and advanced aircraft. The United States responded not only with weapons of its own, but with a fevered exploration of fringe science. Could the Philadelphia experiment have been buried beneath these new efforts? Some theorists argue that the project was not abandoned after 1943, but simply moved deeper underground. As the CIA launched programs like MKUltra, probing the limits of human consciousness and mind control, perhaps the Navy pursued its own forbidden frontier. Experiments in bending time, manipulating electromagnetic fields, even researching teleportation as a weapon of war. Consider this. By the late 1940s, reports of strange flying craft had exploded across the United States, culminating in the infamous Roswell incident of 1947. What if these phenomena were not alien at all? What if they were the accidental byproducts of experiments like Philadelphia, warships and aircraft slipping into dimensions where they did not belong, only to return in grotesque, unrecognizable forms? It was a chilling thought, that UFOs might not be visitors from the stars, but reflections of our own secret tampering with reality. The men who vanished. Sailors who allegedly served aboard the Eldridge told stories long after the war, often from the corners of dingy bars, their voices hushed, their eyes darting for listeners. One spoke of a man who had walked into a bulkhead and never come out. Another told of seeing two crewmates vanish in a flash of light while playing cards, their belongings clattering to the floor as though they had never existed. And then there was the tale of the freeze men, sailors caught in mid-gesture, locked in time like living statues. Shipmates would shake them, slap them, even burn them with matches to break the trance. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes it did not. The Navy, of course, officially denied every one of these stories. But the denials only deepened the suspicion. For what is more compelling than a truth the government insists does not exist? The Eldridge in Greece. After the war, the USS Eldridge was transferred to the Greek Navy, where she served for decades under the name HS Leon. For most, this seemed to disprove the legends. Here was the Eldridge, still afloat, a perfectly ordinary destroyer escort, used by Greece until the 1990s. But skeptics asked another question. If the ship had been part of a failed experiment, would the U.S. Navy not want her far away, handed off to an ally where curious eyes could no longer pry into her past? Greek sailors, it is said, treated the Leon with superstition. Some believed she carried a curse. Malfunctions plagued her electrical systems, strange accidents occurred, and in hushed tones, veterans whispered that the ship was haunted by shadows, echoes of men lost in Philadelphia. Perhaps, they said, the experiment had never truly ended. The physics of horror. Could any of this have been real? Could the Navy in 1943 have stumbled upon a way to bend the universe? Scientists argue that cloaking a ship with electromagnetism, let alone teleporting it, would have required energy on a scale far beyond what was possible. And yet, modern research into quantum physics and space-time manipulation reveals ideas disturbingly close to the legend. Wormholes, entanglement, and the warping of light itself are no longer the fantasies of science fiction, but serious fields of study. If such concepts are possible now, with our technology, who is to say what the desperate minds of wartime scientists might have attempted in secret? The weight of silence. What chills more than the testimonies, more than the letters, is the silence. The official Navy records present the Eldridge's service as routine, dull, uneventful. And yet those records are suspiciously clean, almost too perfect. If there is one constant in war, it is chaos, delays, errors, inconsistencies. But the Eldridge's log is spotless, as though it had been rewritten after the fact. Meanwhile, Carlos Allende died in obscurity, dismissed as a madman. Jessup, the researcher who received his letters, took his own life under strange circumstances in 1959, found dead in his car with the engine running. Some called it despair. Others whispered that he had come too close to the truth. The legend endured, not because of proof, but because of the void where proof should be. The threshold. So what truly happened in Philadelphia that October day in 1943? Was it a failed experiment in electromagnetic cloaking? A myth spun from sailors' drunken tales? Or a glimpse into forbidden knowledge? Knowledge so dangerous it could unravel reality itself? The answers remain locked away, hidden behind classified files and military silence. But if the stories are true, even in part, then the Philadelphia experiment was more than just a test of technology. It was a test of humanity's hubris. For in reaching to control the forces of the universe, the Navy may have opened a door that was never meant to be opened. And once opened, such doors are not easily closed. Shadows of Montauk. As the years passed, the Philadelphia experiment refused to fade. Instead, it evolved. By the 1980s, a new chapter emerged, the Montauk Project. According to conspiracy lore, Montauk was a secret U.S. military program based at Camp Hero, a decommissioned Air Force station in Long Island, New York. There, scientists were said to have continued the very work begun in Philadelphia, experiments in electromagnetism, time travel, and mind control. The key figure was Preston Nichols, who claimed he had recovered repressed memories of participating in Montauk's experiments. His stories were bizarre, filled with fantastical details: psychic children, wormholes, contact with extraterrestrials, and even monstrous beings summoned from other dimensions. At first glance, his accounts seem pure fantasy. And yet, the overlap with the Philadelphia experiment is undeniable. Both involve ships disappearing, men losing their sanity, and science tearing holes in the fabric of reality. Could it be that the Eldridge was the seed, and Montauk the tree that grew from it? If so, the Philadelphia experiment was not an isolated event, but the beginning of something far larger. Hollywood and the myth. The Philadelphia experiment has been immortalized in film, television, and literature. The 1984 movie The Philadelphia Experiment presented the story as science fiction, dramatizing the tale of two sailors who leap forward in time after the ship vanishes. But here lies the unsettling part. The film was allegedly based on classified accounts, and some claim that its very release was intended to blur truth with fiction. By turning the experiment into entertainment, the public would forever dismiss it as fantasy, even if fragments of reality lurked beneath. It is a strategy often whispered about in conspiracy circles: hide the truth in plain sight by disguising it as fiction. The more outrageous the claim, the easier it is to ridicule. And yet, the legend grew stronger, not weaker. For every skeptic who laughed, a believer leaned closer, whispering, "What if it really happened?" The physics of the impossible. In recent decades, scientists have explored concepts that seem eerily connected to the Philadelphia experiment. Quantum entanglement, where particles interact instantly across vast distances, suggests the universe itself has hidden connections. Wormholes, predicted by Einstein's equations, imply shortcuts through space-time. Metamaterials, engineered to bend light, are the modern foundation for invisibility cloaks. None of these technologies existed in 1943, or did they? Could the Navy have stumbled upon crude, unstable prototypes decades before mainstream science caught up? Imagine a world where the Philadelphia experiment was not an accident, but the first step in weaponizing space-time itself. Imagine ships not merely invisible, but capable of appearing anywhere on Earth, or even anywhere in time. It sounds like madness, yet madness has always been the twin of genius. Testimonies in the dark. Perhaps the most haunting aspect of the legend is the human cost. Stories persist of surviving sailors who were never the same. Men haunted by nightmares, plagued with seizures, and terrified of shadows. Some allegedly disappeared from public life, relocated under new identities, or confined to psychiatric hospitals. In one tale, a man walked through a wall years after the experiment, right in front of his horrified family, never to return. In another, two shipmates were found fused together in their bunks, dead, their bodies grotesquely merged as though the atoms themselves had betrayed them. Of course, skeptics dismiss these as urban legends. But even urban legends carry a strange weight when told with trembling voices by men who refuse to give their names. It is one thing to fabricate a story. It is another to live in fear of it. The silence of the Navy. The U.S. Navy has consistently denied that the Philadelphia experiment ever took place. According to official records, the Eldridge was never even in Philadelphia in October 1943, but stationed in New York. And yet, holes remain. Crew lists are incomplete. Logs seem altered. Veterans who served on sister ships recall rumors circulating even then, rumors too strange to ignore. The Navy's silence echoes louder than words. For when governments deny too forcefully, suspicion grows. And in the space between denial and truth, myths take root. The cultural haunting. Why does the Philadelphia experiment endure? Why has it captured imaginations for decades, inspiring books, films, and endless speculation? Perhaps because it touches a primal fear, that human ambition may unleash forces we cannot control. That behind every advancement lies a cost, often hidden, often borne by the innocent. The sailors of the Eldridge, if the stories are true, were pawns in a game they never understood. Sacrifices to a vision of war, where even reality itself could be weaponized. And perhaps, deep down, we suspect that these experiments never stopped. That somewhere, in some hidden laboratory, men in white coats are still pushing the limits of time and space, still opening doors they do not know how to close. The cinematic ending. Imagine it. The night sky over Philadelphia, 1943. The ship humming with unnatural power, sparks crawling across the deck. Sailors shouting, clinging to rails as reality itself begins to twist. And then silence. The Eldridge is gone. But in the stillness, something remains. A shimmering afterimage, a distortion in the air, like heat rising from asphalt. Those who stare too long swear they see faces within it, faces screaming soundlessly, trapped between worlds. Minutes later, the ship reappears. Men stumble, vomit, collapse. Some are missing. Others are fused to metal, their eyes wide in frozen terror. The experiment is over. The logs will be rewritten. The Navy will deny everything. But the truth, the true horror, cannot be erased. For somewhere in the depths of the Atlantic, shadows linger. And sometimes, on stormy nights, sailors whisper of ghostly shapes in the water. The faint outline of a destroyer escort, flickering in and out of existence, cursed to wander between dimensions forever. The USS Eldridge, the ship that defied reality, the ship that should never have existed. Declassified whispers. In the late 1990s, documents surfaced through the Freedom of Information Act, revealing fragments of Cold War projects in electromagnetism, stealth technology, and psychological warfare. None mentioned the Philadelphia experiment directly, but the language was familiar. Phrases like magnetic field manipulation, phase shifting of objects, and anomalous effects on human cognition. Were these innocent research notes, or breadcrumbs left behind by programs that grew from that October night in 1943? Historians who studied the papers argued that much of it could be explained as radar cloaking or electronic warfare. Yet the chilling undertone persisted. It was as though the official line was whispering, "Yes, we tried something, but you don't want to know what it cost." Survivors in the shadows. Throughout the 1960s and 70s, strange testimonies trickled in. Men claiming to have served aboard the Eldridge, or connected vessels, stepped forward, their stories trembling on the edge of madness. One claimed that after the experiment, he could no longer look at mirrors without seeing alternate versions of himself, versions that aged differently, or bore scars he did not remember receiving. Another insisted he had been pulled into a vortex during the test, floating in a dimension of light and silence where time itself was fluid. He said he had seen the future, cities burning, seas rising, towers collapsing. When pressed for dates, he would only whisper, "Soon." The most infamous testimony came from Al-Bilek, who declared that he had traveled not only through space but centuries into the future, to the year 2137, where he witnessed a devastated Earth ruled by strange, oppressive technologies. Later, he said he had gone even further, to the year 2749, where humans had merged with machines. Most dismissed his accounts as fantasy, but others leaned in closer, wondering, if even fragments of what he said were true, what exactly had been unleashed in Philadelphia? Modern sightings of the Eldridge. Here is where the story turns darker. Long after the ship was decommissioned, rumors emerged of ghostly sightings. In 1999, a Greek sailor stationed near Crete swore he saw a destroyer flicker into being beside his vessel for less than a minute. The ship bore a faded nameplate, DE-173, the designation of the Eldridge. In 2012, a group of fishermen off the coast of Norfolk reported a similar vision. A gray ship materialized in the fog, silent and still, before dissolving into thin air. Their compasses spun wildly, their radios crackled with static, and one of the men collapsed with violent seizures. Skeptics call these hallucinations tricks of the sea. Believers whisper that the Eldridge never truly returned, that it became a phantom ship, doomed to drift between dimensions, occasionally bleeding back into our world. And perhaps worst of all, when it appears, those nearby suffer the same madness that haunted the original crew. A darker purpose. The Philadelphia experiment, if real, was never about invisibility. It was about control. Control of space, of time, of perception itself. Imagine a weapon that could move troops across oceans in seconds. A ship that could appear behind enemy lines, strike, and vanish. A technology that could manipulate not just matter, but the very flow of history. What war could resist such a prize? What government would hesitate to pursue it, no matter the cost? And so some believe the Philadelphia experiment was only the beginning, a crude prototype for projects that continued in silence. Projects hidden in deep underground bases, where men and women vanish from public records, and the laws of physics are rewritten in secret. The legacy of silence. Today, the Philadelphia Navy Yard is a place of industry and tourism. Families stroll where the Eldridge once docked, unaware of the legend anchored in those waters. But some nights, when the fog rolls in and the river is quiet, locals swear they hear echoes, a low hum, like engines straining against reality. Lights flicker on the water, and for a moment, shadows of men can be seen walking along invisible decks, men out of time, forever trapped between worlds. The Navy denies it all. Official history records the Eldridge as an ordinary ship, nothing more. But history has never belonged solely to the victors. It belongs also to the whispers, the fears, the things we are not meant to know. The final horror. Consider this. If the experiment truly fractured space-time, then perhaps its effects still ripple outward. Perhaps every vanished plane, every lost ship in the Bermuda Triangle, every unexplainable glitch in reality is connected. Perhaps the sailors of the Eldridge are still out there, not dead, but adrift, screaming into the void, waiting for a world that can never call them home. And perhaps, just perhaps, the experiment never ended. Every now and then we feel it, when a second stretches longer than it should, when a shadow moves where no one stands, when déjà vu chills the spine. Tiny tears in the fabric of existence, reminders that in 1943, humanity reached too far. And somewhere in the depths of the unseen, the USS Eldridge waits. Its hull rotting, its crew half men, half shadows. A ghost of steel and sorrow, flickering in and out of time. If you ever hear the hum of engines on a foggy night, if you see a shape shimmering on the horizon where no ship should be, turn away. Do not look too long, for some doors, once opened, never truly close, and some experiments never end.